Great. Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming. Thanks for coming to an English presentation when there's a perfectly good Russian alternative. I appreciate the vote of confidence. So I'm going to talk about using Scrum with Kanban. But first, introduction. This is me. My name is Jonathan Hansen. I'm the Vice President of Operations at a company called Thumbtack Technology. We're a software development consulting company with an amazing development team in Omsk. Has anybody been in Omsk before? Good man. Good man. Great place. In addition, I don't work in Omsk, although it is great. I live in New York City. And in addition to working at Thumbtack, I run New York City Lean Coffee. We use Kanban to organize a meeting. So I've been working with Scrum for about 7 years. I had started using it. I was working at a startup company that we were small at one point, and we didn't really have any process whatsoever, nothing defined. We were just doing whatever, and it was working until we got very large. When our team grew from like a technical team of 5 to a team of 150, the way we were developing software wasn't working so great. And Scrum was giving us a lot of benefits. It was giving us more predictability, it was helping our technical team and our product team understand each other. And understand what we were working on. We aligned a lot better. We had a lot of benefits from working with Scrum. About 3 years ago, we started bumping up against some of the challenges of working in Scrum, some of its limitations. And so I started looking for other things, and I bumped up against Kanban and started using that. And so started learning more about Kanban. That's when I started this New York City Lean Coffee. In running this, we have lots of visitors at our meetup, and they come and they say to me, Jonathan, I'm a Scrum Master. I understand Scrum. I want to learn more about this Kanban thing. When should I use Kanban instead of Scrum? And the way they phrase that question is very key, and I understand why they ask it that way. If you go to the internet, try to learn something about Kanban, a lot of sites you go to, they'll talk about how Kanban is great and Scrum is terrible, or Scrum is great and Kanban is awful. And it can be very confusing. But honestly, I don't really see the conflict. So let's just, first of all, how many people are using Scrum in their everyday life? How many people are using Kanban, just out of curiosity? Cool. Is anybody using both Scrum and Kanban together? Okay, so a few of us. So let's just, most of you guys know it, but let's just review the rules of Scrum very quickly. Scrum, I think of Scrum as a very simple math equation. 3 + 4 + 3 = Scrum, right? There's 3 roles: the product owner, team member, and Scrum Master. There's 4 meetings that you're supposed to have: a sprint planning session, a daily Scrum, a sprint review or demo, and a sprint retrospective. And then there are 3 artifacts that are supposed to occur with Scrum. There's a product backlog, there's a sprint backlog, the stuff you're going to work on in your sprint, and then there's a product increment that's supposed to be the output of your Scrum. That's it. Those are the rules of Scrum. Nothing, no more, no less. Kanban method, let's look at that. Visualize your work, limit your work in progress, manage flow, make policies explicit, implement feedback loops, improve collaboratively, evolve experimentally. That's the list of them. In your pamphlets that you got with the schedule and everything, if you flip through, there's a section which I'm pretty sure explains this a little bit more. I have no idea because I can't speak any Russian at all, but the pictures look good, so I think it's doing it right. This is what Kanban is. So I don't think there's much conflict here, to be honest, if we actually look at what these things are trying to do. Now, sometimes Kanban is described as these practices. Sometimes people talk about the principles of Kanban. There's a very good new book that came out, and only in English as far as I know, called Kanban from the Inside. I'm not getting any money by mentioning this, but it is a good book. And it describes Kanban from the perspective of values, the values that the people in the Kanban community have that result in these practices. So if you look at some of these, implement feedback loops. To me, that's what you're doing in a sprint review and in a sprint retrospective. You're getting feedback from your customer, you're getting feedback from your team. So as far as I'm concerned, there really is no conflict between what these things actually are at all. So today I'd like to talk about 3 ways that you can use Scrum and Kanban together. Kanban can help your Scrum team do work inside of your sprint. Kanban can help you do work that doesn't fit in sprints very well. And Kanban can help you, as a Scrum team, work and do good things beyond what Scrum by itself provides. Okay, so let's start by talking about how Kanban can help inside of a sprint. Kanban is something that can help teams finish features and fix bugs faster. So let's imagine a scenario. You have a software development team. This team has 3 developers, 1 QA engineer, and they're working on a website. So not a very radical scenario, I'm sure you've seen this. So they're about to start a sprint. These are the things they're going to work on. They're going to work on an item search. They're going to add an item detail page. They're going to add a user edit page. It's the beginning of their sprint. They've estimated the work. They've broken down these features into tasks. And they figured out it's 178 hours of work. So we go through the sprint, and we get to the end there. And then the question is, was this a successful sprint? They've steadily worked. There aren't many clues here that there were any problems. They didn't quite make it towards the end, but they're pretty close, so it's probably mostly successful, right? Well, let's look at just a few days through the sprint. Let's put it on a simple board. You know, they've broken it down. There are the 3 features, and with each feature there are the tasks. Those are the little blue things, and QA work. Of course, the QA work they won't start until they finish their tasks. So they're going to pull work from their sprint backlog. They're going to start doing it, then they're going to be done. Halfway through the sprint, they've finished a lot of tasks, and they've got plenty in progress. They're burning away hours on their estimates. Every day you go to your daily stand-up with these guys, and they say, yep, it used to be 4 hours. Now there's only 3 hours left on this thing. It's coming along great. By the end of the sprint, though, we see a very different story, right? All the development work is finished, but there are all these bugs, right? So what are you supposed to do at this point? After a sprint, you're supposed to have potentially shippable software, remember, with Scrum. So you can release this buggy software in the world. That's not a great scenario. You can delay releasing the software. Nobody likes that. So let's dig a little deeper into what happened here. So again, but first, so look at this burn down. Was this a successful sprint? And I like Donald Reinertson. I also thought I should have a Russian word in my slide. This is the only one I know, though. No, this was not a successful sprint, unfortunately. Because while the team had gotten a lot of tasks done, they'd burned down a lot of tasks, they weren't actually able to, they were 91% done, but 91% done is 100% useless. They couldn't use any of those things because they still had the work was really inventory. It wasn't actually a finished product. And while they spent all this time in their daily stand-ups thinking about, all right, I have less work today on my tasks. I'm successful. We're all a success. In truth, there's only 3 statuses that matter. It doesn't matter that your task is 90% done. It matters that you've started it, or you haven't started it, and you finished it. That's it. Those are the only things a task can be. Okay. So so now let's look at it. This picture shows a little bit more too. In Don Reinertson's books, he talks a bit about cumulative flow diagrams in both managing the design factory and principles of product development flow. They're a really useful tool for you to see what's really going on in your sprint. So the way a CFD works, cumulative flow diagram, on the y-axis here you have shows you how many items are in each status, right? So the green on the top are the things that are to do, red are the things that are in progress, and blue are the things that are done. So what you see here is you see this big, thick red stripe that goes through the sprint. And what this represents is your work in progress. So you can look to see how long on the x-axis, it tells you also how long it took you to do things, how long it actually took tasks to go from one phase to the next. And we see that in terms of in-progress tasks. On average, this team, it took them 3.7 days to finish a task. The average work in progress, they have 7.5 items on average throughout the sprint. These facts are not unrelated. There's this rule called Little's Law, and it tells us that your average work in progress divided by your throughput, in other words, how many things you get done in a day, gives you how long it takes to do things. So again, this team, they had on average 7.5 items. They finished about 2 things a day, and on average, and so they had a lead time of 3.7 days to finish a task. Okay. So because another thing that you see on this is that they were working on tasks all across all of the features. So actually for this team, they had nothing testable until 7 days. It was 7 days before any of their features was dev complete. And so remember, there's a QA guy on this team. What was he doing all this time? Not much. And then once he had something that he could actually QA, of course he finds bugs, as we always do. And he found that, and the problem he had is that when he would show a developer a bug, and it would take them a little bit longer to fix bugs because the code hadn't been in their head. They've been working, maybe they find bugs on something that they'd worked on like a week and a half ago. So actually fixing bugs took less time, and there were more of them. So how can Kanban help in this scenario? Kanban can help with those 2 problems they were having, quality and predictability, by letting you map your value stream, limit task work in progress, and limit feature work in progress. So let's look at that again, how it would work using Kanban with Scrum together. So just as before, you have your backlog of things in your sprints. You have doing, you have done. But we're going to do we've done a couple of things here. We've drawn this line horizontally through the work, and we're breaking up the board into features and tasks. And we're saying, all right, well, if we really look at what our process is, we develop features, and then we QA features, and then they're done. That's what our process is. So this team is going to put a work in progress limit on features. They're going to say we're only ever going to work on 2 features at a time. And with respect to tasks, we're only going to work on 4 tasks at a time. Otherwise, we leave the process more or less as it is. We've committed to this work just like we did before. We're going to demo it at the end. We're still doing a sprint. So let's walk through this a bit. So after 5 days of work, the team has been focused on a smaller number of features, and they've also been focused on finishing a smaller number of tasks. They've been working together to just finish tasks rather than starting new ones whenever they want. By the end, they have actually finished everything. They win. Now, let's look at these cumulative flow diagrams side by side. Whereas before, when they weren't controlling the work in progress, and they had 7.5 items in progress, they had a lead time of 3.7 days. Here you see a much thinner stripe. And while they started working right away at the maximum of the work in progress limit, you see where it's towards the left side of that graph, it's a little bit thicker. They started flowing because they were focused on a fewer number of tasks. While before, remember, there were QA wasn't able to do anything for 7 days because there was work being done across all of the features all at once. Here, QA was able to start working within 4 days because the developers were focused on just a few features and therefore actually finishing features earlier in the sprint. Similarly, since they finished actual features early within the sprint, when the QA still found bugs, but they found bugs and the work was still in the developers' heads. And so they were very quickly able to resolve the bugs. Similarly, because of the work in progress limit that they had on their tasks, they were able to focus. They didn't have to put off working on the bugs because they already had tasks in progress. They were able to take them on. And so you see that the total amount of work didn't grow as much, and the work went faster. So that's just one example of how Kanban can work within a sprint. Let's look at the burn downs too, just to see. might feel like I'm making this up or gaming it in favor of Kanban because I like it. But actually, you see, they didn't do that much more work on the Kanban side. But you do see a much smoother path here. And the reason for that is because of those WIP limits that they had in place. Okay. So yes, once again, Kanban can help you in your sprints by helping you express what your value stream actually is. And that will show you where it makes sense for you to put work in progress limits on tasks and features. So let's talk about how Kanban can help for work that doesn't fit in sprints all that well. There's a concept in Scrum called an epic, right? Epics are stories that are too big for a sprint. And I can tell you an example of a project I was working on a while ago. We were working on this this huge project. It took us over 1.5 years to do it. That was huge for us, at least. And the goal of this project was to replace an old legacy CMS with a brand new shiny one. This project involved 25 developers in 3 different offices in 2 different countries. We wrote somewhere over 500,000 rather, lines of code. Took a year to do it. We were building this project with Scrum. We had, again, with 25 developers, we had this split into multiple teams, something like 4 teams. They had sprints that were of equal length with each other. And the problem we had, because we were working on legacy software with lots of technical debt in it, and we had some features that we wanted to implement, we wanted to finish and show to our product owner. But the work was just too big to actually get done in a single sprint. And several years ago, I took a Scrum training with Jeff Sutherland, one of the creators of the class. And I asked him, what do you do in a situation where your work doesn't fit in a sprint? He says, you have 2 options in Scrum with that. You can either increase the size of your sprint, or you can split up the work. And that's a good answer. Increasing the length of our sprints, not an option for us because we had all these sprints going on and that would have been much too confusing for our product owner. Splitting up features in this case wasn't possible either. We just could not split up the work so that meaningfully marketable features could get done in a sprint. It wasn't possible for us. So what did we do? We had to do these huge architectural changes in order to deliver the features we wanted. Well, as developers, we thought to ourselves, no problem. In this sprint, we're going to do the back-end stuff first. We're going to get that done in this sprint. And then in the next sprint, we're going to work on the actual front-end stuff. But the problem here is, if you think about that, end of the sprint, we have a demo with our product owner. How do you demo a completed back-end architecture? Well, the way I thought to do it was really rather stupid. What I did was we had a sprint demo, and what did I show the product owner? I said, good news, we have had a successful sprint. Can't you see? All of our unit tests have passed. Are there any product owners in the room? Any product managers? Yeah. What would you do what would you do with that if your development team gave you this information? She was very polite about it. She went under a meeting, but it was a complete waste of her time. It's useful that it was useful for us that happened, but it wasn't at all useful for her. And in fact, we lost some credibility with her. Okay, so that was the mistake we made. So how can Kanban help in that kind of situation? Here's one way you can do this that we've had some success with. You can take the work that can actually fit in sprints, treat that as though it's sprint work. That's the work on the lower side of this line. And take the work that doesn't fit in sprints and treat that a bit differently. So for the sprint work, we have a work in progress limit on the backlog, a rather large one. For the things that don't fit in the sprint, we have a much smaller work in progress limit. We have, for the team as they're doing work, they have work in progress limits that apply to the work that's going on. But those limits apply equally to the work that's technically part of the sprint and the longer running work. So we still do demos at the end of every sprint, and we demo whatever we've committed to in that sprint. And if any of these longer running things happens to be done, we'll demo that too. Now, the advantage this has is that you're still showing product owners useful things that they care about. And you're also making visible to the team the fact that we have these long-running things in progress. And so we're balancing, in a sense, these competing needs that we have. We need to work on these long-running things. We need to work on these short-term things, too. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is how Kanban can help you move beyond what Scrum is by itself. So far, I've mostly been talking about how you leave Scrum alone and just use Kanban around the edges or use it to improve within your sprint. But the goal of Scrum is continuous improvement. Talk to the Scrum founders, and this is what they talk about Kaizen all the time. They say Scrum is supposed to help you improve your work, and it does in many ways. But here's a quote that I read recently that I think does have some truth to it. In Scrum, you should inspect and adapt on everything except Scrum. The rules of Scrum are the rules of Scrum. You have the 3 + 4 + 3. You're not supposed to change those things. What I would suggest you do instead is treat Scrum as a foundational place from which you can grow your process. Start like if you remember back to the slide with the rules of the Kanban method. Start with where you are now. If where you are now is Scrum, you should keep doing Scrum. So I'm going to talk about a couple of ways that at Thumbtack we have used Kanban to move beyond Scrum where it made sense to do so. One is removing the waste in the sprint planning process. How many of you guys are on teams where your developers wake up at the beginning of a sprint and think, good, today is sprint planning day. I can't wait to go spend 4 hours in a meeting talking about the sprint. I got really good, actually, while I was using just Scrum at convincing developers to show up at sprint planning meetings, but I mostly did it by bribing them. I gave them food, I gave them beer. It didn't necessarily help the estimates, but it made them a little bit happier. So the goal of sprint planning is the goals of sprint planning are good. The goals of sprint planning are for the team to understand from the product owner what his or her priorities are, and for the team to plan the work they're going to do, break it down. Those are great goals. But what I would encourage you to do is to look for waste in that process. And one place that can have some waste is in estimating work. Estimation often gets done using story points. Some people use the Fibonacci scale. Some people use t-shirt sizes. And story points are a proxy variable that are meant to give you some indication of how much work it is, let you know what you're going to be able to finish in your sprint. Well, we were working with a company a few years ago who was using story point estimation, and we thought it'd be interesting to look at what these story points actually meant. And so we looked at about 460 2- and 3-point stories that this company had. And we just wanted to see, okay, how long does it actually take for us to do the tasks, these 2- and 3-point tasks? So we had a little table for each 2-point story. We said, all right, it actually took us this much time to complete this story. For the next one, it took that much. And this was this company's graph. So with 2-point stories, they had in their mind that a 2-point story meant it's probably going to take us about 1 or 2 days to get this story done. And a 3-point story probably going to take us 4 to 5 days. But you see the reality for this team, or for this company. 2-point stories, a lot of times they get those done in 1 day. That's great. A lot of times they get it done in 8 days. It's really all over the map there. 3-point stories as well. Really no indication of what those numbers meant. The only thing we know for sure is they spent a lot of time coming up with those numbers, and really for no value. So what's an alternative to estimating story points? We were working recently at Thumbtack on a mobile development project, and there was a relatively new project manager on the project, and she asked me, Jonathan, got this team. We don't really know what we should put in our sprint next. We can't really tell what we can get done and what we can't get done. So the team had been working for about 3 sprints at this point, and so they were using this product LeanKit to manage the work. LeanKit has a pretty nice graph actually that tells you for each item how long when it got done. That's what's on the x-axis there, and on the y-axis how long it took to do the thing. So you see here are each of these black dots is one of the stories, and where it is, when it got done, and how long it took to do. And on average for this team, this team gets things done in about 5.94 days. Upper limit is more like closer to 30 days. Pulling that into a histogram, you see actually a much nicer curve. You see that for this particular team, most of the things they get done take between 1 and 5 days to do. That was a good first step. The next thing that they did was they sat down and they categorized this work. I had her sit down with them and just ask the team, all right, let's look at the things we've done and come up with categories that make sense to you. How would you categorize each of these tasks? These features, rather. So they did that, and then they said, yeah, well, some of these are really network-heavy features. Some of these are ones that are very heavy on changing the UI. And so they categorized the subsets of this work. And then they graphed that. And they found that, OK, with the so-called network features, lots of them get done less than 2 days. Lots of them get done in 6 to 10 days. And so then they said, OK, well, what do these things have in common? They broke it down even further. And so-called UI features, they found that, OK, most of the time, we're getting these things done in like 1 to 2 days. So when it came time to plan the next sprint, they said, all right, we have this many people. Let's look at. We see the priorities for the product owner, and now let's categorize what are these upcoming features, and let's categorize them using the categories we've set already. And now we have some sense of understanding how long it's going to take us to finish these features because we've done things like this before. And so they were able to shape a sprint not using magical story points, but using historical data. All right, so just to summarize, an alternative to estimating features, study historical data, categorize the work, calculate ranges for those categories, and shape your sprint using the actual data. Okay, another way that you can use Kanban to move beyond what Scrum does is to question the notion of the time box. So a sprint is a time box. You commit at the beginning of a sprint to work that you're going to do. You commit that you're going to get done within that sprint. A really nice aspect of the sprint is that it gives you a regular cadence for talking to your product owner about what you should do next, and for actually delivering code and for retrospecting. Those things are good, but then it doesn't always make sense for those cadences to be the same. We were working at Thumbtack. We were working with a dating site. I won't say which one it is. We were building an experimental system for them. It had a lot of really heavy back-end aspects to it. So there was a very long process for us to put together an MVP. We did it using Scrum. It's a good product. Then we shifted into a mode where they wanted to add new features. They wanted to fix bugs. They started to get kind of frustrated with how long it was taking us to finish features and how long it was taking us to finish bugs. So we said, okay, we're going to use Kanban in the Scrum, like we were talking about before. We're going to put some work in progress limits on development. And on testing, and this gave us some local optimization. It was good. Meant that suddenly our cycle time got much better when we did that. Suddenly, work that we had started, we were finishing within 3 days. And they were kind of happy about that, but they had this other problem, which is that, so we were working in 2-week sprints, and they would come to us, say, for example, on the second day of a sprint and say, hey, here's a bug. Can you fix this, please? We said, yeah, no problem. We've already committed to a sprint, but we'll put it in the backlog for our next sprint. So what that means is that if a bug was pretty important, but not so important to break a sprint, then it could take up to 4 weeks to actually finish. And in fact, when we found that the lead time for features on average for this team was 32 days. It was taking us, on average, 32 days to deliver whatever they asked us to do. So we made a bit of a change. We said, all right, seems to be a problem that we are waiting so long to put stuff in the sprint backlog. So we're gonna change this a little bit. We're gonna replace the sprint backlog with a rolling priorities queue. We said to the product owner, you can put anything you want in this queue anytime you want to do it. We're going to put a WIP limit of it on 10 to force you to choose the 10 most important things to you. You can prioritize it within this, put things at the top, put things at the bottom. You can do this anytime you want to do it. The only thing we ask is that once we've started development, you don't make us stop doing any of that work. But up until we commit to doing these tasks, change it any way you want. Put something new, take something out. So whenever there was work at the top of this list, we'd pull it, and we'd work on it. So whereas before we had a cadence of every 2 weeks pulling work, now because we had flow in our actual work in progress, we were able to add flow in our prioritization. We had the same cycle time as before, but now we went from 32 days to finish something, to finish things on average, suddenly to being able to finish things within 14 days. Movement in the right direction, they liked that, but they said, okay, now we see this problem, and we see this problem now because we have a Kanban board on this Scrum project. We see that things are starting to pile up in that ready to demo column. You finish things in a flow, and then it just kind of sits there forever. What can be done about that? Why do things have to sit here until the end of a sprint? And the reason we gave them is because for us, it is very costly to deploy to production. We have a very costly production deployment process. It's very manual, it's very easy to make mistakes, and it takes us all day to do it. So please don't make us release software more often. It's very stressful and very risky. And they said, okay, Thumbtack, you say you're so great at engineering. Engineer us a solution for making push button deployments. So the team said, well, it's very easy. And they came up with a list of what they would have to do in order to be able to have push button deployment. And we told them what it was, and they said, great. They took that item that we described, they put that at the top of the priority list because they were very motivated about that. So we pulled that work, we did it, and then at the end of that, we were able to have push button deployment. And once we had push button deployment, it meant we could deploy whenever we wanted. And so we put a WIP limit on that column as well, and we said, okay, whenever there are 2 or more items, we're going to deploy. This was helpful as well. So we went, in this case, from taking 14 days to deliver something that the product owner said they cared about, to 7 days. Team kept working on other optimizations after that. But throughout this process, we went from being able to deliver work that the customer cared about from 32 days to 7 days and beyond. Now, if you look at this process at this point, you can't really say that the team is doing Scrum anymore, actually. They didn't set out to destroy Scrum, but as they kept listening to their customer, they found that the problem that the customer had was not being solved by Scrum anymore. And Kanban gave them permission and a set of tools for evolving beyond Scrum. And in doing so in a way that also continued to meet the team's needs. So remember, it was really painful for the team, really stressful for the team to do everyday deployments. And instead of just forcing them to do it, this created a conversation where we could figure out how to balance the customer's needs and the team's needs. And that's the most important point, actually, I've made here. I've given you a couple of ideas. I've shown them to you. You've taken pictures of them. And these are good ideas. But these things that we did are in response to actual needs that our customers had. Your customer might happen to have these problems. They might have others. The important thing is that you use Kanban not to implement what we did at Thumbtack, but to implement solutions to the problems that you actually have, to help you balance the team's goals and the customer's goals, even as those goals evolve. So, to wrap up, Kanban can help you move your team beyond what Scrum is by itself. Kanban can help you manage work that doesn't fit in sprints particularly well. And Kanban can help you do work inside of your sprints. And you improve your sprints by, you can improve your sprints by having better quality and predictability. You can manage epics that don't fit in the sprint, and you can align your team with your customer. Thank you.
Вопросы будут? Да, окей, без проблем. Меня зовут Максим. У меня такой вопрос. В какой-то момент вы перешли от бэклога к приоритетам, и заказчик мог менять, ну, то есть оперативные приоритеты. А в какой момент именно шло планирование спринта, ну, то есть разбитие на подзадачи?
At some point, you move from backlog to prioritizing. And when does the customer comes up with all these things and change it? How does he change the priorities and things like that? So what was the process for that?
Sure. Before they prioritized during that sprint planning meeting, before they prioritized in the sprint planning meeting, right? Or they came to the sprint planning meeting with their priorities. What they were doing at this point, the product owner had access to the Kanban board, and they were able to drag cards back and forth. They had complete control over when things should happen and whether they want to make something a priority, or whether they could change their mind and pull it out. So we gave them access to the board, and they changed it anytime they want.
But the question was when team do actual breakdown of task. If product owner changes scope within the sprint, when do we break down? Just before taking it into work?
Yeah, they did it just in time, so just before taking the work.
The analysis column before this prioritization column, when did the analysis happen?
So the analysis column for that team, what they meant by that was analysis of business need. But you bring up a good point, and actually a place where this went was making more explicit the fact that, okay, you have this prioritization queue, and then before we actually start coding, yeah, we have a step where we take this, we ask the product owner questions, we break it down into actual tasks.
On the previous slide, you had instead of demo, you had deployment instead of demo. My question is deployment to where? Just to production environment or to some separate one, and how you then integrate if something was not, if stakeholder is not satisfied by the demo, for example, how the process go?
Yeah. So because deployment was very, very cheap, we could deploy very fast. We also had very fast rollback. You know, we had a staging environment. We had a production environment. So another, you bring up an excellent point though. One of the aspects of Kanban is to make process policies explicit. So for the purposes of a presentation, you know, we have these simple column titles. But what we did, that's one of the key things I think with Kanban is to write down, okay, well what do we mean when we say deployment? What does this actually mean? What happens before this? What happens after this? This is actually a really important thing to do to make sure you have alignment on various stages of your process. To say, okay, maybe the DevOps engineers, they thought they knew what they meant by deployment, but maybe somebody else didn't. So on the board, we wrote down deployment. Here's what happens during deployment. There was a deployment checklist for that.
Let's get back to planning moment. If you've got planning right when you took from the backlog, is it costly to ask many questions, product owner, each time you take a feature from the backlog? Because traditionally, if you do it once per sprint, it's easier to get everyone together to discuss this, to discuss tasks that need to be made, and to work on possible solutions And if you do it several times per sprint, when you pick up the most important task, it gets more complicated, and you need high availability of product owner for that process.
So yes, in this case, we had high availability of the product owner, and we had high availability, and because we were planning small pieces at a time, each time we planned a feature, it was very fast to do. So we had an environment where we were able to do that just-in-time planning, so to speak. If you don't have that on your team, you shouldn't do it. And that's the point I'm really trying to make is, don't try to copy the outcomes that I had. Use Kanban as a discovery method to solve the problems that you're having in your organization. In this organization, or with this customer, we didn't have a problem of getting availability from our customers. We have that for other customers. With this one, they were very available. Their jobs were on the line about this product. But we had other problems. We had problems of things taking a long time to deliver. So we solved that problem. Maybe you need to use Kanban to solve the problem of your product owner not being very available. I don't know, or maybe something else.
Еще у нас, в принципе, есть время еще на один вопрос. Тогда спасибо. Thank you.
Thank you.